She walked in, and what she saw left her frozen. Her most loyal friend was lying in front of her husband. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Before we dive into today's story, I want to take a moment to say something straight from my heart. I want to send a prayer out to each and every one of you, my sweet, incredible family. May your hearts always be filled with love, and may happiness surround you no matter where you go. I hope that the stories we share together continue to bring you peace, comfort, and joy. And no matter what happens in life, always know you are loved and valued more than words could ever express. Now, my beautiful family, how was the last story? I truly hope it touched your heart the way I intended. Yesterday, I wasn't feeling too well, and I want to be honest with you about it. I've been noticing some of my loyal family members drifting away, drawn to other channels. And while it hurts, I want you to know I will never ever force anyone to stay. Every word, every line, every story I share comes straight from my heart. It's created with deep love, with passion, and with the hope that it reaches the right souls. But no matter where life takes us, my heart remains here with all of you. My beautiful family, I love you. And I will continue to pour my heart and soul into every story we share, because I know those of you who are meant to be here will always feel the love in every word. And if you ever feel lost, remember, you are never truly alone. I will be here, and my love for you will never fade. So today, let's do something beautiful together. Let's start this story with all the love in the world. We're about to dive into another intense, passionate, and unforgettable journey. I can't wait to share it with you. Are you ready? Let's go. The Sydney Opera House gleamed like a collection of pearl shells against the azure sky, its iconic sails catching the last rays of the setting sun. Bethany Washington stood on her penthouse balcony, 43 floors above the bustling harbour, letting the warm Australian breeze play with her dark curls. The salt-tinged air carried whispers of ships passing below, their horns echoing off the glass and steel canyons of Sydney's financial district. At 32, Bethany had achieved what many considered impossible. The daughter of a Chicago public school teacher and a jazz musician had broken through both racial and social barriers to become one of Sydney's most respected art curators. Her latest exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art had drawn international acclaim, with critics praising her ability to blend traditional Aboriginal art with modern interpretations. But as she gazed at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows, she knew her greatest achievement wasn't hanging on any gallery wall. 3 years ago, she would have laughed if someone had told her she'd be married to Calix Orion Prince, the CEO of Prince Global Investments. The thought brought a smile to her face as she remembered their first meeting at the annual Royal Hospital Charity Gala. She had been arranging a last-minute adjustment to her contemporary art installation, a piece exploring the intersection of wealth and social responsibility, when a deep voice had interrupted her concentration. "The brushstrokes seem almost deliberate in their chaos," he had said, startling her enough that she nearly dropped the painting she was adjusting, as if the artist is suggesting that disorder itself is a form of pattern. Bethany had turned, ready to deliver her practiced curator's spiel, only to find herself staring into the most intense grey eyes she'd ever seen. Calix Prince stood before her in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd just run his hands through it in thought. She'd seen his photos in the financial papers, of course. Everyone in Sydney knew the Prince family name, but nothing had prepared her for his presence in person. "Most people just see the chaos," she had managed to reply, straightening her emerald green gown. "Most people don't look closely enough." His smile had transformed his face from merely handsome to devastating. "I'm Calix Prince, Bethany Washington." She had extended her hand, expecting a quick professional shake. Instead, he had taken it gently, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a way that sent electricity shooting up her arm. the curator everyone's been talking about. I've been following your career since your installation at the Venice Biennale last year. Your perspective on post-colonial art in the Pacific realm is refreshing. The fact that he had actually known her work, could speak about it intelligently, had been the first surprise of many that evening. They had spent hours discussing everything from Aboriginal Dreamtime stories to the influence of European modernism on Australian art. When other guests had tried to pull Calix away to discuss business or make introductions, he had politely but firmly declined, keeping his attention focused solely on their conversation. It wasn't until much later that Bethany learned how many society photographers had captured their meeting, how many tongues had wagged at the sight of Calix Prince, scion of one of Sydney's oldest families, spending an entire evening deep in conversation with an American art curator. The photos had appeared in several society magazines the following week, Calix leaning in close to hear her over the music, both of them laughing at some shared joke, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. The whispers had started immediately. Some questioned her credentials, suggesting she had somehow orchestrated their meeting. Others made thinly veiled comments about her background, her race, her presumed social climbing. The old money circles of Sydney could be brutally exclusive, and an American curator of mixed race was decidedly not part of their accepted narrative. But Calix had never cared about society's expectations. When he called the next day to invite her to dinner, he had chosen a highly visible restaurant in Circular Quay. When she hesitated, concerned about the publicity, he had simply said, "Let them talk." "I'm more interested in hearing your thoughts on the Indigenous art movement in the Northern Territory." That had been the moment she began falling in love with him, not for his looks or his wealth, but for his complete disregard for anyone else's opinion when he knew what he wanted. He had pursued her with the same focused intensity he brought to his business dealings, but there was nothing calculated about it. Instead, it felt like watching someone finally find what they had been searching for without realizing it. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of gallery openings, weekend trips to remote artists' communities, and long conversations that stretched into the dawn. Calix approached art with the same analytical mind he brought to business, but he also had an innate appreciation for beauty that matched her own. He could spend hours discussing the investment potential of emerging artists, then turn around and speak passionately about the emotional impact of a single brushstroke. The proposal had come 6 months later, during a private viewing of a new installation at the Opera House. Calix had arranged for them to have the space to themselves, and as they stood surrounded by hanging lights that mimicked the stars of the outback, he had dropped to one knee. "You've curated the most extraordinary collection of moments in my life," he had said, opening a box to reveal a vintage Art Deco ring. "Would you consider making it a permanent installation?" The wedding had been a blend of cultures and traditions, held in the Royal Botanic Garden with the Opera House and Harbour Bridge as their backdrop. Bethany had worn a gown that incorporated traditional Aboriginal designs, created in collaboration with an Indigenous artist she had championed early in her career. Calix had surprised her by having a jazz quartet play during the ceremony, a nod to her father's profession. Now, 3 years later, standing on their penthouse balcony, Bethany felt a deep sense of contentment wash over her. The sun had fully set, and the harbour had transformed into a canvas of twinkling lights. Behind her, she heard the soft padding of familiar footsteps on Italian marble. Lost in thought, Calix's arms slipped around her waist, and she leaned back against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with the leather of his office chair. Just appreciating the view. She turned in his embrace, reaching up to straighten his tie, a habit she had developed early in their marriage. "How was the board meeting?" "Productive. We're expanding the art investment division." His grey eyes sparkled with excitement. "I was thinking you might want to consult on some of the acquisitions." "Mixing business with pleasure, Mr. Prince." "Always, Mrs. Prince." He leaned down to kiss her, and Bethany marveled at how, after 3 years, her heart still skipped at his touch. Inside their penthouse, the phone began to ring. Probably another gallery director or artist seeking her opinion. But for now, Bethany remained in her husband's arms, watching the boats glide across the harbor like dark shadows on silver glass. She had curated many collections in her career, but this moment, this life she had built with Calix, was her greatest masterpiece. The warm breeze carried the faint sounds of the city below, a symphony of life and possibility. Bethany closed her eyes, savoring the perfect balance of professional success and personal fulfillment. She had no way of knowing that this golden moment was as fragile as spun glass, or that the arrival of an old friend would soon shatter everything she held dear. But for now, in the gathering darkness of a Sydney evening, Bethany Washington stood wrapped in the arms of the man she loved, believing with all her heart that some things were meant to last forever. The city lights winked at her like countless stars, holding their secrets close, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal the truth hidden behind their golden glow. Chapter 2. The Reunion. The email arrived on Bethany's phone during her morning ritual of coffee on the balcony, the Sydney sunrise painting the harbour in shades of rose and gold. Her sudden squeal of delight made Calix nearly spill his own perfectly brewed Colombian roast. "She got in." Bethany's fingers trembled as she read the message again. "Brielle got accepted into the University of Sydney's PhD program in quantum physics." Calix set down his coffee cup, a warm smile spreading across his face at his wife's excitement. "Your friend from Chicago? The one you've told me so many stories about?" Bethany could barely contain herself as she paced the balcony, her silk robe flowing behind her like wings. "Yes. We've been best friends since we were 14. God, Calix, you don't understand what this means. Brielle Silver is... she's more than just a friend. She's the sister I never had." The memories flooded back as Bethany settled into one of the custom-designed teak lounges. She could still picture Brielle on that first day at Lincoln Park High School, a tall, willowy girl with honey blonde hair and startling blue eyes, defending a younger student from bullies. Bethany had been the new kid, fresh from her mother's apartment in Bronzeville, feeling out of place among the more privileged students. But Brielle had spotted her sitting alone at lunch and simply dropped into the seat across from her. "That's an original Basquiat print on your notebook cover," Brielle had said, pulling out her own lunch. "Most people here wouldn't recognize it. I'm Brielle." From that moment, they had been inseparable. While Bethany immersed herself in art, Brielle dove into physics and mathematics, but their differences only made their friendship stronger. They would spend hours in Brielle's family's Lincoln Park brownstone, Bethany sketching, while Brielle explained quantum theories using household objects as props. When Bethany's parents divorced during their junior year, it was Brielle who held her through the tears and helped her channel her pain into a series of paintings that would later help secure her spot at art school. "She sounds remarkable," Calix said, pulling Bethany back to the present. He moved behind her chair, strong hands massaging her shoulders. "When does she arrive?" 3 weeks. Bethany leaned into his touch, then suddenly sat up straight. "Oh God, we need to get the guest wing ready, and she'll need help finding an apartment, setting up bank accounts." Calix's laugh was rich and warm. "Why look for an apartment? The guest wing is bigger than most Sydney flats, and it's sitting empty. She can stay here while she gets settled." Bethany twisted in her chair to look up at him, heart swelling with love. "You wouldn't mind having someone else in our space? Your family is my family." He bent to kiss her forehead. "Besides, I'm curious to meet this genius best friend of yours. Maybe she can finally explain to me why you insist on hanging that abstract expressionist piece in our bedroom. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Bethany threw herself into transforming the guest wing of their Harbor View mansion, wanting everything to be perfect for Brielle's arrival. She replaced the standard hotel-style furnishings with pieces that reflected her friend's taste. Clean lines and modern aesthetics mixed with comfortable touches. The main bedroom was painted a soft blue that matched the harbor views, and Bethany commissioned a local artist to create a wall installation that incorporated equations and artistic elements. Calix watched her preparations with amused affection, occasionally offering suggestions, but mostly just enjoying his wife's enthusiasm. He arranged for his company's relocation team to handle all the bureaucratic details of Brielle's move, ensuring everything from her visa to her university paperwork was processed smoothly. "You know," he said one evening, finding Bethany arranging fresh flowers in Brielle's soon-to-be sitting room, "I've never seen you this excited about anything except maybe that retrospective at the Modern last year." Bethany smiled, adjusting a strand of jasmine. "It's just... Brielle was there for every important moment in my life. When I got the scholarship to study art history, when I landed my first gallery job, when my dad got sick. She even flew to Venice for my first major exhibition. But then I moved here, and even though we talk all the time, it's not the same. Having her here, being able to share this life with my best friend." She trailed off, emotion thick in her throat. Calix wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Then we'll make sure her welcome is worthy of such a reunion." The day of Brielle's arrival dawned clear and bright, as if Sydney itself was putting on its best face. Bethany insisted on going to the airport herself, pacing the international arrivals area until she spotted a familiar tall figure pushing a loaded luggage cart. "Brie!" The nickname escaped her lips in a joyful cry as she ran forward. "Beth!" Brielle abandoned her cart, meeting Bethany halfway in a fierce embrace that drew curious looks from other travelers. They clung to each other, laughing and crying at the same time, years of separation dissolving in seconds. When they finally pulled apart, Bethany took a moment to really look at her friend. Brielle had always been beautiful, but the years had refined her features, giving her an elegant sophistication that turned heads throughout the terminal. Her honey blonde hair was shorter now, cut in a stylish bob that emphasized her high cheekbones, and her blue eyes sparkled with the same intelligence and warmth Bethany remembered. "Look at you!" Brielle held Bethany at arm's length. "Living in Sydney has definitely agreed with you. You're glowing. Me, look at you, Princeton's star physicist, looking like she just stepped off a runway." They chatted non-stop during the drive home, years of video calls and emails, nothing compared to being able to reach out and touch each other, to share the same space again. Bethany pointed out landmarks as they drove, but mostly they caught up on the kind of personal details that somehow never made it into their digital communications. "So," Brielle said as they turned onto the private drive leading to the house, "when do I get to meet this husband of yours? The one who swept you off your feet and carried you off to the other side of the world?" "Soon. He wanted to be here, but there was a board meeting he couldn't reschedule. He's planning to join us for dinner." Bethany glanced at her friend. "I can't wait for you to meet him, Brie. He's everything I never knew I was looking for." The car rounded the final curve, and Brielle gasped as the house came into view. The modern mansion seemed to float above the harbor, its glass walls reflecting the water and sky. "Beth, this is incredible. Wait until you see your rooms." Bethany couldn't keep the excitement from her voice as she led Brielle through the house to the guest wing. She watched nervously as her friend took in the specially designed space, holding her breath until Brielle turned to her with tears in her eyes. "You remembered everything," Brielle whispered, running her hand along the equation-inspired wall art. The colors, the style, even that ridiculous obsession I had with fractals in college. Of course I remembered. You're my best friend. They spent the afternoon unpacking and catching up, falling easily back into their old patterns of conversation and comfortable silences. Bethany ordered lunch from her favorite local cafe, and they ate on Brielle's private balcony, watching boats crisscross the harbor below. "I still can't believe you're really here," Bethany said, popping a piece of sushi into her mouth. "It feels like a dream." "A good dream, I hope." Brielle's voice held a note Bethany couldn't quite identify. "The best!" Bethany checked her phone. "We should start getting ready. Calix arranged for dinner at Key. It's this amazing restaurant with views of the Opera House. He wanted your first night in Sydney to be special." Later, as they dressed for dinner, Bethany felt a familiar flutter of excitement at the thought of introducing her two favorite people. She chose a deep burgundy dress that Calix particularly loved, while Brielle opted for a sleek black number that made her look like a classic film star. They were sharing a bottle of champagne in the main living room when Bethany heard the front door open. "That'll be Calix," she said, standing quickly. "Brie, there's something you should know. He can be a bit intense when you first meet him, but it's just because he's passionate about everything he does." Footsteps sounded on the marble floor, and then Calix appeared in the doorway, still in his business suit, but with his tie loosened slightly. Bethany moved to his side, watching proudly as he turned his attention to their guest. "Brielle Silver," he said, stepping forward with his hand extended. "I've heard so much about you. Welcome to our home." Bethany watched as her best friend rose gracefully to shake her husband's hand. Something flickered in Brielle's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. But it was gone so quickly, Bethany thought she must have imagined it. "Thank you for having me," Brielle replied, her voice smooth as honey. "Beth has told me wonderful things about you as well." The evening that followed was everything Bethany had hoped for. Calix was at his most charming, asking thoughtful questions about Brielle's research and sharing stories about his own college days, studying physics before switching to business. Brielle matched him intellectually, their conversation ranging from quantum mechanics to global economics, while Bethany watched contentedly, sipping her wine and occasionally adding her own observations about the intersection of science and art. "You should have seen us in high school," Bethany told Calix over their main course, her heart full of wine and happiness. "Brielle and I were inseparable. She was there for me through everything, my parents' divorce, my art school applications. She's family." Calix smiled, his steel grey eyes warming as they met hers across the table. "Then she's family to me too." He raised his glass in a toast. "To family. Both the ones we're born with and the ones we choose." As they drove home later that night, Bethany nestled against Calix's shoulder in the back of their car, watching the city lights reflect off the harbor. Everything felt perfect. Her marriage, her career, and now her best friend here to share it all. "Thank you," she murmured to Calix, "for making her feel so welcome, for understanding how important this is to me." He kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Seeing you happy makes me happy. Besides, I like her. She's brilliant, and she obviously cares about you as much as you care about her." Bethany smiled, contentment washing over her like a warm wave. In that moment, her world felt complete, every piece fitting together perfectly. She had no way of knowing that she was watching the beginning of her own tragedy, that the very completeness she celebrated would soon become her greatest vulnerability. But that night, as Sydney's lights twinkled like earthbound stars, Bethany Washington simply held on to her happiness, believing that some bonds were truly unbreakable. In the front seat, Brielle sat quietly, her reflection in the window showing a thoughtful expression that, had Bethany been watching, might have given her pause. But Bethany's eyes were closed, her head resting trustingly on her husband's shoulder, dreaming of all the wonderful days ahead. The harbor breeze carried the faint sound of waves against the shore, nature's own whispered warning of storms to come. But on this night, in this moment, there was only joy, trust, and the warm certainty of love, both romantic and platonic, filling the spaces between three hearts beating in the darkness. Chapter 3. Changes in the Wind. The first month of Brielle's residence transformed the Harbor View mansion in subtle but unmistakable ways. Her presence brought a new vibrancy to the space, filling corners that Bethany hadn't even realized were empty. The sound of her friend's infectious laugh echoing through the corridors reminded her of their carefree days in Chicago, making the vast Australian home feel somehow more intimate, more alive. Mornings took on a new rhythm. Where Bethany and Calix had once enjoyed quiet coffees on their balcony, they now found themselves gathering in the main kitchen, where Brielle would often be already seated at the marble island, her laptop open to complex quantum equations while she absently stirred her tea. She had always been an early riser, and some habits hadn't changed with the hemispheres. The quarks exhibit a fascinating behavior under these conditions, Brielle would say, her blue eyes bright with enthusiasm as she tried to explain her research. Bethany would smile into her coffee, watching as Calix leaned over Brielle's shoulder to examine the calculations, his own background in physics allowing him to engage with concepts that went far over Bethany's head. Their morning conversations would drift from quantum physics to global markets to local art exhibitions, each of them contributing their expertise to create a rich tapestry of ideas. Bethany loved these moments, seeing her two worlds merge so seamlessly. Calix seemed to come alive in these discussions, his usual reserved business demeanor giving way to an almost boyish excitement when debating theoretical physics. "You've found yourself quite the Renaissance man," Brielle commented one morning after Calix had left for the office. She was helping Bethany clean up breakfast, moving through the kitchen with the ease of someone who had always belonged there. "Most CEOs I've met can barely spell quantum mechanics, let alone discuss string theory over coffee." Bethany beamed with pride. "He's full of surprises. Did you know he almost went into research before his father convinced him to join the family business? Sometimes I think he misses it." "It shows," Brielle said softly, something indefinable flickering across her face. "He has a true passion for the science." The days fell into a comfortable pattern. Bethany's work at the gallery often kept her busy with installations and client meetings, while Brielle divided her time between the university and her study in the guest wing. Calix, despite his heavy schedule running Prince Global Investments, made a point of being home for dinner whenever possible. Their evening meals became events to look forward to, filled with animated discussions and shared bottles of wine from Calix's carefully curated cellar. Brielle proved to be an excellent cook, often experimenting with recipes that reminded Bethany of their favorite Chicago restaurants. "Remember that little Italian place in Lincoln Park?" Brielle asked one evening as she stirred a pot of risotto. "The one where we used to spend our allowance on pasta." "Giuliano's!" Bethany exclaimed, the name bringing back a flood of memories. "God, we thought we were so sophisticated, ordering in our terrible attempted Italian accents." "Your accent wasn't that bad," Brielle laughed, the sound carrying through the kitchen. "At least you didn't accidentally order sheep's brains like I did that one time." "The waiter's face!" Bethany doubled over with laughter, nearly dropping the wine glasses she was carrying. "He looked so impressed, like he couldn't believe a 16-year-old would be so adventurous." "What's this about sheep's brains?" Calix appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up after a long day at the office. He moved naturally into the kitchen, dropping a kiss on Bethany's cheek before peering into Brielle's pot with interest. Just reminiscing about our misspent youth, Brielle answered, her cheeks slightly flushed from the steam, or perhaps the wine she'd been cooking with. This risotto is my attempt to recreate our favorite dish from back then, minus any accidental organ meats. It smells amazing, Calix said, reaching for the wooden spoon. Brielle playfully swatted his hand away. 5 more minutes, Mr. CEO. Good things come to those who wait. Bethany watched the interaction with warm contentment, grateful for how easily her husband and best friend had fallen into a comfortable friendship. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing the two people she loved most in the world getting along so well. The weekends became adventures in showing Brielle their favorite spots around Sydney. They explored hidden beaches, visited markets in suburban neighborhoods tourists never saw, and spent long afternoons at small galleries Bethany had discovered through her work. Calix, who normally spent weekends catching up on business matters, began joining them more frequently. I can drop Brielle at the university, he offered one Monday morning, adjusting his Italian silk tie in the mirror. It's on my way to the office. Bethany kissed him gratefully, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. You're the best. Brielle's lucky to have such a thoughtful host. It's no trouble, he replied, his steel-grey eyes meeting hers in the mirror. Besides, I've been meaning to discuss that quantum computing startup that presented at last week's tech conference. Brielle's insights could be valuable for our investment strategy. The arrangement quickly became routine. Calix would drive Brielle to the university in his sleek Aston Martin, their conversations about physics and technology often continuing long after they'd pulled into the parking lot. Sometimes they would text Bethany during the day, sharing jokes from their morning discussions or debating points that had come up during the drive. Bethany's gallery work grew more demanding as she prepared for a major exhibition featuring emerging Indigenous artists. Long hours spent coordinating with artists, dealers and collectors meant she was often the last to arrive home, finding Calix and Brielle already deep in conversation over dinner. You missed quite the debate, Calix would tell her as she joined them, his eyes bright with intellectual stimulation. Brielle's theory about market behavior following quantum probability patterns is fascinating. I'm sure it is, Bethany would reply with a tired smile, helping herself to whatever delicious meal Brielle had prepared. But can we talk about something else? I've been staring at pricing spreadsheets all day. They would shift the conversation to accommodate her, but sometimes Bethany caught them exchanging glances, sharing some private joke or reference she couldn't quite follow. It was natural, she told herself. They shared interests and intellectual passions that she didn't, just as she and Brielle shared memories that Calix would never be part of. Still, something began to shift in the atmosphere of the house, like the barely perceptible change in air pressure before a storm. It was in the little things, the way conversations would sometimes pause when she entered a room, the increasing frequency of Calix's late nights at the office, coinciding with Brielle's evening study sessions in the university library. One evening, returning early from the gallery, Bethany found them in the living room. Brielle sat cross-legged on the sofa, her laptop balanced on her knees, while Calix leaned over her shoulder, pointing at something on the screen. They were physically closer than necessary, their heads nearly touching as they discussed whatever was displaying on the monitor. They jumped slightly when Bethany cleared her throat, moving apart with a casualness that seemed somehow rehearsed. "Beth, you're home early," Brielle said, her voice just a fraction too bright. "We were just going over some market analysis algorithms." "Fascinating stuff," Calix added, straightening his tie in a gesture Bethany had come to recognize as a nervous habit. The patterns in stock market behavior show remarkable similarities to quantum field theories. Bethany pushed away the uneasy feeling in her stomach. This was her husband and her best friend, the two people she trusted most in the world. They shared intellectual interests and enjoyed each other's company. It was perfect, wasn't it? exactly what she had hoped for when Brielle first arrived. But that night, lying awake beside Calix's sleeping form, Bethany found herself remembering a conversation from their high school days. They had been discussing relationships, and Brielle had admitted a tendency to fall for unavailable men. "There's something compelling about the forbidden," she had said, her teenage voice trying to sound worldly. "The excitement of wanting something you can't have." Bethany had laughed it off then, too young to understand the complexities of adult relationships. Now, in the darkness of her Sydney bedroom, those words echoed with a new resonance. She rolled over, studying Calix's profile in the moonlight. His face was peaceful in sleep, showing none of the intensity that marked his waking hours. No, she told herself firmly. She was being paranoid. Brielle was her oldest friend, and Calix was devoted to her. The changes in their household dynamic were natural adjustments to having a new person in their space. Nothing more. Besides, their life was perfect now. The gallery was thriving. Calix's business was expanding into exciting new territories, and Brielle's research was garnering attention in academic circles. They were all succeeding, all happy. What could possibly go wrong? The harbor winds whispered against the windows, carrying salt and secrets on their breath. In her wing of the house, Brielle sat at her desk, the blue light of her laptop screen illuminating her face as she stared at a photo taken at the last gallery opening. Calix in his perfectly tailored suit, his hand resting casually on her arm as they discussed quantum theory in front of an abstract painting. And in the master bedroom, Bethany finally drifted off to sleep, unaware that the foundations of her perfect world were already beginning to crack. That trust, like quantum particles, could exist in multiple states until observed, and that sometimes the act of looking could destroy everything. Chapter 4. Subtle shifts. The first changes were so slight Bethany barely noticed them, like shadows shifting imperceptibly as the sun moved across the sky. It was in the way Brielle's eyes lingered on Calix during breakfast, her gaze tracking his movements with an intensity that went beyond casual observation. How Calix began mentioning Brielle's research with increasing frequency, his voice taking on a particular warmth when he spoke her name. The late-night discussions about quantum physics that Bethany couldn't quite follow. Conversations that would fall silent when she entered the room. Spring had arrived in Sydney, bringing with it a profusion of jacaranda blossoms that turned the city streets into rivers of purple. Bethany stood at her gallery window, watching tourists photograph the trees while she waited for her morning coffee to cool. The exhibition of indigenous artists was less than 2 weeks away, and she had been spending more time at work, coordinating the final details. Her phone buzzed with a message from Calix. "Working late tonight. Important investor meeting. Don't wait up." Before she could respond, another message arrived, this time from Brielle. "Study group running long. Back late. Don't hold dinner." Bethany stared at the two messages, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. It wasn't the first time their schedules had aligned like this. Calix's late meetings often coincided with Brielle's extended study sessions. Pure coincidence, she told herself. Sydney's financial district and the university were on opposite sides of the city. She threw herself into work, reviewing artist statements and finalizing placement details for the exhibition. Around midday, her assistant Marcus brought in a stack of social magazines. "Thought you might want to see these," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You and Calix made the society pages again." Bethany flipped through the glossy pages until she found the spread. It was from last week's charity gala at the Modern, a series of photographs showing Sydney's elite mingling among contemporary artworks. Her breath caught as she found the image that had probably prompted Marcus's concern. Calix and Brielle stood before a large abstract canvas, their heads close together in animated discussion. His hand rested on her bare shoulder, fingers curved slightly as if drawn to her skin. Brielle's face was tilted up to his, her expression rapt, blue eyes shining with something that looked uncomfortably like adoration. In the background, barely visible, was Bethany herself, engaged in conversation with a donor. "It's nothing," she said, more to herself than to Marcus. "They're discussing quantum theory. You know how passionate they both are about physics." Marcus said nothing, but his raised eyebrows spoke volumes. He had been with the gallery long enough to recognize the signs of attraction captured by the photographer's lens. That evening, despite the late hour, Bethany decided to surprise Calix at his office. She picked up dinner from his favorite Thai restaurant and took a taxi to the Prince Global Investments building. The security guard greeted her warmly. She visited often enough to be well known to the staff. The executive floor was dark, except for the light spilling from Calix's corner office. Bethany approached quietly, her heels silent on the thick carpet. Through the glass walls, she could see him at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. "The quantum computing applications are revolutionary," he was saying, his voice carrying through the partially open door. "Yes, I understand the theoretical nature of the research, but no. I trust her completely. Brielle knows what she's talking about." Bethany froze. Brielle? Why was he discussing her research with investors at this hour? "Listen, I need to go. Yes, I'll have the proposal on your desk tomorrow. And thank you for understanding the confidential nature of this project." She waited a moment before pushing the door open, not wanting him to know she'd overheard. "Surprise," she said, holding up the takeout bags. "I thought you might be hungry." Calix started slightly, quickly closing several tabs on his computer screen. "Beth, I wasn't expecting you." "Obviously." She set the food on his desk, trying to catch a glimpse of what he'd been looking at. "Important investor meeting?" "Yes, very important." He stood, coming around the desk to kiss her cheek. "We're exploring some cutting-edge technology investments. Actually, Brielle's research has been incredibly helpful in evaluating the potential." "So I heard." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You seem to find her insights very valuable." Calix's expression flickered, concern, guilt, before settling into his usual calm smile. "Of course. Her expertise in quantum physics is exactly what we need for this new direction. But enough about work. Let's enjoy dinner." They ate at his desk, the Sydney skyline twinkling beyond the windows. Calix asked about the exhibition preparations, and Bethany found herself relaxing as they fell into familiar patterns of conversation. This was her husband, the man who had pursued her with single-minded devotion, who had defied society's expectations to marry her. She was being ridiculous. "Oh, before I forget," Calix said as they were cleaning up, "Brielle mentioned she might need a ride home from the university tomorrow. Her study group runs late, and she's not comfortable with the night buses. Would you mind picking her up? I have another late meeting." "Of course not." Bethany kept her voice light. "Although it seems like you've been having a lot of late meetings lately." "End of quarter," he replied smoothly. "You know how it gets." The next evening, Bethany left the gallery early to pick up Brielle. The university campus was quiet, most students having departed hours ago. She texted Brielle to let her know she'd arrived. "In the physics building," came the reply. "5th floor quantum lab. Come up." The building was modern, all glass and steel. Bethany's heels clicked against the polished floors as she made her way to the elevator. The 5th floor was dimly lit, most offices dark except for a few where dedicated researchers still worked. She followed the signs to the quantum lab, pushing open the heavy door. "Brie?" The lab was empty. Computers hummed quietly, complex equipment she couldn't identify casting strange shadows. On one of the workstations, a coffee cup still steamed beside an open notebook. Bethany approached, recognizing Brielle's elegant handwriting. But it wasn't physics equations that filled the page. Instead, she found what appeared to be diary entries. His mind matches mine in ways I never thought possible. The way he looks at me when we discuss quantum theory. If only things were different. The words blurred before her eyes. Bethany stepped back, her heel catching on something. She stumbled, grabbing a desk for support and knocking over a stack of papers. As she bent to pick them up, a receipt fluttered out. Dinner for two at an intimate restaurant in Darling Harbour, paid for on Calix's corporate card. The date matched one of his late meetings. "Beth?" Brielle's voice came from the doorway. "I was in the restroom. Are you okay?" Bethany straightened quickly, shoving the papers back into a messy pile. "Fine, just clumsy." She forced a laugh. "Ready to go?" Brielle gathered her things, chatting about her research as they walked to the car. Bethany barely heard her, her mind replaying every interaction she'd witnessed between her husband and best friend over the past months. The way Brielle's hand brushed against Calix's when reaching for the salt at dinner. How their morning discussions seemed to require them to lean so close together over laptop screens and research papers. The inside jokes she wasn't part of. The conversations that stopped when she entered rooms. But trust ran deep in Bethany's veins. This was her husband and her best friend, the two people she trusted most in the world. She was seeing ghosts in shadows, finding patterns where none existed. Wasn't she? That night, she lay awake long after Calix returned home, listening to his steady breathing beside her. In the guest wing, a light still burned as Brielle worked late into the night. The harbor winds whispered against the windows, carrying questions without answers. The next morning, Bethany rose early and went to her private studio, a space she used for her own artistic pursuits when not at the gallery. She hadn't painted in months, too busy with work and too content with life to feel the urgent need for creative expression. Now, she found herself reaching for her brushes, squeezing rich colors onto her palette. The canvas seemed to paint itself. Dark swirls of doubt threading through fields of trust, shadows lurking behind bright facades of happiness. When she stepped back, she saw she had created an abstract piece that captured everything she couldn't put into words. "That's powerful," Brielle's voice came from the doorway. "What inspired it?" Bethany turned to find her friend, watching with those intelligent blue eyes that seemed to see too much and too little at the same time. "Just processing some feelings," she replied carefully. "It's beautiful," Brielle said softly, "but somewhat disturbing, like something's about to shatter." Their eyes met, and for a moment Bethany thought she saw something flicker in Brielle's gaze. Regret, defiance, but it was gone too quickly to name. "Paranoia is the thief of joy," Bethany said, quoting her mother's favorite phrase. But as she cleaned her brushes, she couldn't shake the feeling that joy wasn't the only thing at risk of being stolen. In her pocket, her phone buzzed with a message from Calix. "Quarterly report meeting running long. Don't wait up." And moments later, another from Brielle. "Late study session tonight. See you tomorrow." Bethany stared at the messages, then at her painting with its dark undertones and fractured patterns. Trust ran deep in her veins, yes. But sometimes, beneath the surface of still waters, currents moved in dangerous directions. The Sydney afternoon sun streamed through the studio windows, casting long shadows across her canvas. In the distance, the opera house gleamed like a broken promise, its white sails catching the light and transforming it into something both beautiful and sharp-edged. Like trust, Bethany thought, like love, like betrayal waiting to be discovered. Chapter 5. Shadows lengthen. The evidence accumulated like autumn leaves, each new discovery adding another layer to the growing pile of doubt in Bethany's mind. It was the little things that began to add up. The coffee cups with 2 different shades of lipstick in Calix's office. One her signature red, the other a pale pink she'd seen on Brielle's vanity. The way Brielle's hand brushed against his when reaching for the salt, lingering a moment too long to be accidental. The sudden work meetings that kept him late on the days Bethany had gallery events. Sydney's winter had arrived, bringing with it unseasonably cold winds that howled around the Harbour View mansion's glass walls. Bethany stood in her walk-in closet, surrounded by designer dresses and carefully curated accessories, feeling more alone than she had since moving to Australia. She ran her fingers over the emerald green gown she'd worn the night she met Calix, remembering how his eyes had locked onto hers across the charity gala. Had he looked at Brielle that way during their late-night physics discussions? Did his gaze linger on her friend's face the way it used to linger on hers? The sound of laughter drifted up from the kitchen below, Brielle's musical tones mixing with Calix's deeper chuckle. They were probably making breakfast together, as had become their habit on mornings when Bethany had early gallery meetings. She told herself it was thoughtful of them to let her sleep in, but the intimacy of their shared mornings haunted her. Bethany pulled out her phone, scrolling through recent photos. There they were at last week's gallery opening, Calix standing closer to Brielle than necessary as they discussed a particularly abstract piece. Another image showed them at Sunday brunch, their heads bent together over what was supposedly a discussion of quantum theory. In every photo, the same pattern emerged: subtle touches, shared glances, an electricity she recognized all too well. "You're being ridiculous," she whispered to her reflection in the full-length mirror. "This is Brielle, your best friend since high school. The girl who held you through your parents' divorce, who celebrated every success, who flew across the world for your first major exhibition." But another voice whispered back, "The girl who once admitted she was attracted to unavailable men, the one who said there was something exciting about forbidden love." A knock at the closet door startled her. "Beth?" It was Brielle, already dressed for the university in a tailored navy dress that made her look both professional and alluring. "Calix made those blueberry pancakes you love? Coming down? I'll be right there." Bethany forced brightness into her voice, quickly selecting a Chanel suit for her morning meetings. "Save me some. Always." Brielle's footsteps retreated, but not before Bethany caught the faint scent of her perfume, the same expensive fragrance she'd noticed on Calix's collar last week. The kitchen was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of coffee and fresh pancakes. Calix stood at the stove in his dress shirt and suit pants, tie not yet knotted. He looked perfectly at home, flipping pancakes while discussing quantum entanglement with Brielle, who perched on a bar stool, gesturing animatedly as she explained some complex theory. "Morning, love," Calix said, crossing to kiss Bethany's cheek. "Coffee's fresh." Bethany accepted the kiss, trying not to notice how Brielle's eyes followed Calix's movement. She poured herself coffee, adding cream and sugar with hands that trembled slightly. "I was just explaining to Calix about my latest research breakthrough," Brielle said, her blue eyes bright with excitement. "The implications for his quantum computing investments are fascinating." "I'm sure they are." Bethany sat down, accepting a plate of pancakes. "Though I'm surprised you're discussing investment strategies so early in the morning." Something flickered across Brielle's face. Guilt, concern, before she smiled. "Well, you know how passionate we both are about the science. Sometimes we get carried away." "Clearly." Bethany cut into her pancakes, remembering other mornings when it had been just her and Calix, their conversations focused on art and dreams and each other. "Oh, before I forget," Calix said, checking his watch, "I have another late meeting tonight. The Singapore office needs to discuss the Asian market expansion." "And I have a study group," Brielle added quickly. "We're preparing for a major presentation next week." Bethany set down her fork, the pancakes turning to ash in her mouth. "How convenient that your schedules align so perfectly." "What's that supposed to mean?" Brielle asked, her voice sharp. Nothing. Bethany stood, gathering her bag. Just an observation. I should get to the gallery. We're hanging the new Aboriginal art exhibition today. Beth. Calix started, but she was already moving toward the door. Don't forget we have dinner with the board members tomorrow night, she called over her shoulder. Try not to schedule any late meetings. The drive to the gallery did little to calm her racing thoughts. Sydney's streets were busy with morning traffic, giving her too much time to remember other suspicious moments. The way Brielle's door had been locked one afternoon when Bethany went to borrow a book, though she'd heard movements inside. The mysterious calls Calix took in his study, speaking too quietly to be overheard. The time she'd found one of Brielle's earrings in the cushions of Calix's office sofa. At the gallery, Bethany threw herself into work, directing the placement of paintings and sculptures with almost manic energy. Her assistant, Marcus, watched with concern. "Everything okay?" he asked during a quiet moment. "You seem tense." Bethany stared at the painting they'd just hung, a piece about betrayal in Aboriginal mythology. Have you ever had that feeling where you know something's wrong, but you can't bring yourself to acknowledge it? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Is this about the photos in last week's society pages, the ones of your husband and friend at the quantum computing conference? You saw those? Bethany's voice cracked slightly. It's my job to monitor all press coverage of the gallery and its director. He hesitated. And if I'm being honest, their body language in those photos was noteworthy. Bethany closed her eyes, remembering the images that had appeared in Sydney's social magazines. Calix and Brielle had attended the conference together while Bethany was in Melbourne for an art acquisition. The photographers had captured them during what was supposedly a professional presentation, but their interactions looked anything but professional. Heads close together, shared smiles, his hand resting on the small of her back as they moved through the crowd. "They're just colleagues," she said weakly, "discussing scientific theories I can't begin to understand." "Of course." Marcus's tone was gentle. "But maybe understanding isn't the issue here. Maybe it's about trust, and whether it's being honored." The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Bethany approved lighting arrangements, reviewed catalog copy, and met with potential buyers, all while trying to ignore the constant buzz of her phone. Calix sent his usual messages about work running late. Brielle texted updates about her study group progress. Each notification felt like another crack in the foundation of her trust. Around sunset, Bethany found herself driving past the university, telling herself she just wanted to check if Brielle's study group story was true. The physics building was mostly dark, except for a few windows on the upper floors. She parked and walked inside, her heels clicking on the polished floors. The quantum physics lab on the 5th floor was locked and dark, no study group in sight. With trembling fingers, Bethany pulled out her phone and opened the Find My Friends app she shared with both Calix and Brielle, a safety measure they'd set up months ago. Both location markers showed them across town, in an area known for its intimate restaurants and boutique hotels. Still suspicious, she whispered to herself, remembering the breakfast conversation. Or just finally seeing what's been right in front of you. The drive home was torturous, her mind spinning through every interaction she'd witnessed between her husband and best friend. The lingering touches, the private jokes, the way they seemed to communicate without words. Had she been blind or simply unwilling to see? The mansion was dark when she arrived, the harbor winds whistling through the garden. In the kitchen, she found evidence of a hastily abandoned dinner. 2 wine glasses, 2 plates, candles burned down to stubs. One of Brielle's scarves lay draped over a chair, and beside it, Calix's tie, the one she'd given him for their last anniversary. Bethany sank into a chair, holding the silk tie between trembling fingers. The scent of Brielle's perfume clung to it, mixed with Calix's cologne. The combination was like a physical blow to her chest. Her phone buzzed with a message from Calix. Meeting running later than expected. Don't wait up. Moments later, Brielle texted, study group going well. See you tomorrow. Bethany set both messages to unread and walked to her studio. The painting she'd created days ago, all dark swirls and shadowy forms, seemed to mock her from its easel. She stared at it for a long moment before picking up her brushes. Hours later, as the harbor lights twinkled like distant stars, she stepped back to examine her work. The new painting was a study in betrayal, two figures wrapped in an intimate embrace, while a third stood alone, surrounded by shattered pieces of what looked like mirror fragments. The faces were abstract, but the body language was unmistakable. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke her concentration. Two car doors slammed in quick succession. They weren't even trying to hide their arrivals anymore. Voices drifted up from below, laughing about something before quickly shushing each other. Bethany cleaned her brushes with mechanical precision, listening to the sounds of her husband and best friend trying to pretend they hadn't just spent the evening together. Their footsteps separated, heading to different parts of the house in a choreographed dance of deception. Still, she pushed the thoughts away. Paranoia was the thief of joy, she reminded herself. But as she stood in her studio, surrounded by paintings that spoke of betrayal and loss, she wondered if joy wasn't already gone, stolen not by paranoia, but by the two people she trusted most in the world. The harbor winds grew stronger, rattling the windows of her studio like a warning. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the opera house, its white sails gleaming one last time before disappearing into the darkness. Tomorrow would bring more evidence, more suspicions, more pain. But for tonight, Bethany Washington stood alone in her studio, surrounded by art that told the truth her heart wasn't ready to accept. Chapter 6. The Shattering. The charity gala at the Sydney Modern Art Museum should have been Bethany's triumph. Her new exhibition of contemporary Aboriginal art had drawn international acclaim, with critics praising her ability to bridge cultural divides while maintaining authenticity. The museum's marble halls were filled with Sydney's elite, all there to celebrate her vision. But as she stood beneath the soaring glass ceiling, crystal wine glass in hand, all she could focus on was her husband's absence. Calix had texted an hour ago about an emergency board meeting, promising to arrive as soon as possible. Brielle had sent her regrets as well. Another late study session at the university. Bethany, darling, the exhibition is extraordinary. Helena Blackwood, wife of her lawyer Kingston, air-kissed her cheeks. But where's that handsome husband of yours? And your lovely friend, the physicist? Business calls, Bethany replied smoothly, years of gallery experience helping her maintain a composed smile. You know how it is during quarterly reviews? Helena's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. Of course. Though I could have sworn I saw Calix's car in the university district when I was driving here. Perhaps he was picking up your friend. The crystal stem nearly cracked under Bethany's tightening grip. Perhaps. The gala seemed to stretch endlessly, each moment an exercise in maintaining composure while her mind spun with possibilities. She gave her curator's speech, accepted congratulations from donors, and discussed potential acquisitions with collectors. But beneath her professional demeanor, a storm was brewing. Around 10, as the event was winding down, her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. You need to see this. Attached was a photo, clearly taken within the last hour, showing Calix's distinctive Aston Martin parked in the residential district near the harbor, nowhere near either his office or the university. Something inside Bethany snapped. The careful walls of denial she'd built came crashing down, leaving only cold clarity in their wake. Without a word to the remaining guests, she gathered her things and headed for her car. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and racing thoughts. Every suspicious moment from the past months played through her mind like scenes from a tragic film. The lingering touches, the shared glances, the perfectly aligned late meetings. She had been so determined to trust, so unwilling to believe that the two people she loved most could betray her so completely. The Harbour View mansion was mostly dark when she arrived, save for a warm glow from the master bedroom windows. Her bedroom, her sanctuary. The space she had shared with Calix for 3 years of what she had thought was perfect marriage. Bethany entered the house silently, her heels in her hand. The foyer was littered with carelessly discarded items, Calix's briefcase, Brielle's laptop bag, a trail of clothing leading up the curved staircase. Each piece was another dagger to her heart. Music drifted down from above. The jazz playlist she had created for Calix during their first year of marriage, filled with songs that reminded her of Chicago and falling in love. They were using her music for their betrayal. She climbed the stairs with the slow inevitability of an approaching storm. More evidence marked her path. Brielle's favorite cashmere sweater draped over the banister, Calix's Italian leather shoes kicked off in the hallway, a wine bottle and 2 glasses abandoned on a side table. The master bedroom door was partially open, golden light spilling onto the hallway carpet. Voices drifted out, soft murmurs and quiet laughter that twisted like knives in her chest. "We should feel guilty," Brielle's voice, breathy and low. "We should," Calix agreed, "but I can't bring myself to regret this." "What are we going to do?" "We'll figure it out, together." Bethany stood frozen, the crystal wineglass from the gala still clutched in her hand. She should turn around, walk away, pretend for a few more hours that her world wasn't shattering. But her feet carried her forward, pushing the door open with a soft creak. They were tangled in her Egyptian cotton sheets, the ones she had picked out during their honeymoon in Cairo. Calix's dark head was bent over Brielle's fair one, their bodies entwined in a lover's embrace that left no room for doubt or denial. The crystal wineglass shattered against the wall before Bethany even realized she had thrown it. Shards caught the moonlight like falling stars, a shower of broken dreams raining down on the imported marble floor. They sprang apart, guilty faces turning toward her in synchronized horror. Brielle clutched the sheets to her chest, her honey-blonde hair mussed and lips swollen from kisses that should never have been hers to receive. Calix reached for his discarded shirt, his wedding ring glinting mockingly in the lamplight. "Beth!" Brielle's voice cracked. "Oh God, Beth, please." "Don't!" The word came out as cold as Antarctic ice. "Don't you dare speak to me. Bethany, let us explain." Calix stood, hastily buttoning his shirt. "This isn't what it looks like." A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her, a horrible broken sound that barely resembled humor. "Really? Because it looks like my husband and my best friend are fucking in my bed while I'm at a gallery opening, celebrating my career achievement. Please, tell me how this could possibly be anything other than what it looks like." "It just happened," Brielle whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We never meant what?" Bethany's voice rose with each word. "Never meant to fall into bed together, never meant for me to find out, never meant to destroy every good thing in my life." She moved to her closet, yanking open drawers and pulling out random items of clothing. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely grip the fabric. "What are you doing?" Calix asked, taking a step toward her. "Getting my things. I can't." She choked back a sob. "I can't stay here, not with Beth, please." Brielle was crying in earnest now. "We can talk about this. We can figure it out." "Figure it out?" Bethany whirled to face them. "Like you figured out how to sneak around behind my back? Like you figured out how to lie to my face day after day? Tell me, was this your plan all along? Was the PhD program just an excuse to get close to him?" "Of course not," Brielle protested. "I love you, Beth. You're my best friend." "Best friend?" The words tasted like poison. A best friend doesn't sleep with her friend's husband. A best friend doesn't betray 20 years of trust. A best friend doesn't, her voice broke, a best friend doesn't destroy the one person who has always believed in her. Calix moved toward her, hands raised in supplication. Bethany, love, please, let's be rational about this. Rational. She backed away from him, bumping into her vanity. Her wedding photo crashed to the floor, the frame splintering like her heart. Was it rational to fuck my best friend in our bed? Was it rational to lie to me for months while carrying on your affair? Was it rational to make me think I was crazy for suspecting something was wrong? We never wanted to hurt you, he said softly. But you did. She grabbed her handbag, stuffing in whatever items were within reach. You both did. And the worst part, I trusted you, both of you, with everything I am, everything I have, everything I've ever wanted. She laughed again, that same broken sound. I guess that makes me the fool, doesn't it? You're not a fool, Brielle said, still clutching the sheets around her. We're the ones who... Stop talking. Bethany's voice dropped to a whisper. Just stop. I don't want to hear your excuses or your apologies or your explanations. I don't want to hear anything from either of you ever again. She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. You know what the saddest part is? I would have given either of you anything, everything. All you had to do was ask. She met their guilty faces with eyes that burned with unshed tears. Instead, you chose to take the one thing I never thought I'd have to protect, my trust. The door slammed behind her with a finality that echoed through the mansion. She could hear them calling after her, their voices mixing with the sound of her heels on the marble stairs. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, until she was in her car and driving through the Sydney night. She made it as far as the harbour lookout before the tears finally came. Pulling over, she let the sobs rack her body, each one feeling like it might tear her apart. The opera house gleamed across the water, its white sails unchanged by her personal tragedy. The world kept turning, even as hers lay in ruins. Her phone buzzed repeatedly, messages from Calix and Brielle, probably full of explanations and apologies she couldn't bear to read. With trembling fingers, she pulled up a different contact. Kingston. It's Bethany Washington. I need a lawyer. The harbor winds carried the sound of breaking waves to her ears, nature's own symphony of destruction. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the city, promising rain to match her tears. But beneath the grief and betrayal, something else was building. A cold, hard determination that would carry her through the days to come. The betrayal had frozen her blood, even as her heart burned with fury. But Bethany Washington had not become one of Sydney's most respected art curators by backing down from challenges. She had broken through racial and social barriers, had built a career on her own terms, had carved out a place for herself in a world that often tried to exclude her. She would survive this too. But first, there would be justice. The rain began to fall, drops mixing with her tears as she sat in her car, watching the city lights blur into a kaleidoscope of broken dreams. In her mind, she could still see them tangled in her sheets, could still hear their whispered words of false regret. The images would haunt her, she knew, but they would also fuel her resolve. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of dismantling the life she had built with Calix. Tomorrow, she would face the reality of her best friend's betrayal. Tomorrow, she would start the painful journey of rebuilding her shattered trust. But tonight, Bethany Washington sat alone in her car, letting the storm rage around her while she gathered the pieces of her broken heart. Somewhere in the city, two lovers were probably holding each other, comforting each other, planning their future together. They had no idea what was coming. But they would learn soon enough that some betrayals come with consequences they never imagined. Chapter 7. Exodus. The next 24 hours passed in a blur. time stretching and contracting like a warped reflection in a broken mirror. Bethany moved through her home like a ghost, packing essentials while Brielle pleaded and Calix attempted explanations. Their words meant nothing. They were just noise drowning in the roar of her broken trust. The sunrise found her in her closet, mechanically filling suitcases with whatever her hands touched first. Designer dresses that had made her feel powerful now seemed like costumes from someone else's life. Each item carried memories she couldn't bear to examine. The blue silk she'd worn to their first anniversary dinner, the emerald green that had caught Calix's eye at the charity gala where they met. "Beth, please," Brielle's voice came from the doorway, thick with tears. "Let me explain. It wasn't supposed to happen like this." "How was it supposed to happen?" Bethany asked without turning around, her voice eerily calm. "Was there a better way for me to find my husband and best friend in my bed?" Behind Brielle, Calix appeared, still pulling on a shirt. "Bethany, love, we need to talk about this rationally." A harsh laugh escaped her throat. "Rationally? You want rational discussion after I found you?" Her voice broke. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against a shelf of Italian leather handbags. "There's nothing to discuss. Not anymore." She moved to her jewelry box, carefully removing pieces that were exclusively hers. Birthday gifts from her parents, acquisitions from her early curator days. The diamond tennis bracelet Calix had given her on their honeymoon stayed behind. She couldn't bear to touch it. "You can't just leave," Calix said, his CEO voice slipping into place. "We have the board meeting next week, the new Aboriginal art exhibition opening." The exhibition. Another laugh, this one edged with hysteria. "You're worried about the exhibition while standing here in wrinkled clothes from last night's activities." Brielle stepped forward, reaching for her arm. "Beth, you've been my best friend for 20 years. Please don't throw that away without letting me explain." Bethany jerked away as if burned. "Don't touch me! Don't you dare touch me!" She whirled to face them both, her voice dropping to a whisper. 20 years of friendship, 3 years of marriage, and you threw it all away for what? Secret meetings? Hidden touches? The thrill of betraying someone who trusted you completely? She grabbed her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found the number she needed. Her fingers trembled as she pressed dial. Kingston Blackwood's office. "This is Bethany Washington. I need to speak with Kingston immediately." "I'm sorry, Ms. Washington, but Mr. Blackwood is in court this morning." "Tell him it's about Calix Prince and a divorce. He'll take the call." Calix stepped forward, alarm crossing his face. "Bethany, don't do anything hasty. We can work through this." "Work through this?" She lowered the phone slightly. "Like we worked through your late meetings, your sudden interest in quantum physics, all those times you offered to drive Brielle to the university?" "It just happened," Brielle whispered. "We never meant to hurt you." "Things don't just happen, Brielle. Choices are made, lies are told, trust is broken." Bethany's voice was ice. "You made those choices every day for months. Every smile, every hug, every conversation we had, while you were sleeping with my husband." The phone crackled. "Ms. Washington, Kingston Blackwood here. What can I do for you?" "I need a lawyer," she said clearly, watching Calix's face pale. "Immediately." "Of course. Shall I send a car?" "Please. I'm leaving my house and need somewhere secure to stay. The Four Seasons has excellent security. I'll make arrangements." "Thank you." She ended the call, turning back to her packing. Her hands were steady now, her movements precise. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a cold clarity that felt almost like peace. "You can't stay at a hotel," Calix protested. "This is your home." "No." Bethany zipped the last suitcase. "This was our home. Now it's just another beautiful lie." A discreet text alerted her that Kingston's car had arrived. She gathered her bags, moving through the house that had once been her sanctuary. Every room held memories now tainted. Family dinners in the kitchen, movie nights in the media room, quiet mornings on the balcony. In the foyer, she paused at the large mirror where she'd always checked her appearance before leaving. The woman reflected back was someone new, someone harder, colder, forged in the fire of betrayal. Beth. Brielle made one last attempt, tears streaming down her face. What about our friendship? 20 years. Should have meant something. Bethany opened the front door. Should have been worth more than this. The driver was waiting, professional and discreet as he loaded her bags. Calix and Brielle stood in the doorway, their guilt and dishevelment a stark contrast to the polished perfection of the house behind them. Bethany. Calix's voice stopped her as she reached the car. I do love you. She turned, meeting his eyes one last time. No, Calix. You loved the idea of me, the curator who brought culture to your corporate world, the wife who looked perfect on your arm. But real love requires respect, and you never truly respected me. If you had, you wouldn't have betrayed me with my best friend in my own bed. The car door closed with a soft click that felt like an ending. As they pulled away from the Harbor View mansion, Bethany didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see if they were holding each other, comforting each other in the wake of her departure. Her phone buzzed with a message from Kingston. Checked in under a private name. Meeting arranged for 2 p.m. We'll get through this. The Sydney streets flowed past her window, familiar landmarks suddenly alien in the morning light. The Opera House gleamed in the distance, unchanged by her personal tragedy. Life would go on. The world would keep turning, even as her own reality crumbled. In her purse, her phones kept buzzing. Calix's private number, his office line, Brielle's repeated attempts to explain. She turned them all off, one by one, like shutting doors in a house she would never visit again. The Four Seasons staff were discretion personified, whisking her up to the presidential suite without fuss or questions. The harbor view from the windows was different here. Higher, more distant, offering perspective she hadn't known she needed. Her hands shook as she called Marcus at the gallery. I need you to do something for me. Anything. Go to the house when they're both gone. Pack my personal files, my portfolios, everything from my office. Don't let them know you're coming. Already planned, security team standing by. She ended the call, sinking onto the suite's plush sofa. The numbness was wearing off, reality seeping in like water through cracks in a dam. 20 years of friendship, 3 years of marriage, all destroyed in a single moment of discovery. But as the first tears finally came, falling silently onto imported silk, Bethany Washington made herself a promise. This betrayal would not break her. It would transform her, reshape her into someone stronger, someone who would never again trust so completely or love so blindly. The harbor winds whistled past her window, carrying the salt tang of the sea and the promise of storms to come. Let them come. She had weathered one storm already, the destruction of everything she believed in. Whatever came next, she would face it, standing tall, her broken trust transformed into armor against future pain. Her phone lit up with a final text from Brielle. Please, let me explain. 20 years of friendship has to be worth something. Bethany deleted it without reading further. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. Chapter 8. The Strategy. They've given us everything we need, Kingston said, his office overlooking Sydney Harbour as the morning sun painted the water in shades of gold. The view from the top floor of Sydney's most prestigious law firm matched the gravity of the moment, a perfect backdrop for planning the dismantling of Calix Prince's carefully constructed world. Bethany sat in one of the leather chairs facing Kingston's desk, her back straight as a blade, her Chanel suit an armor of sophisticated defiance. 3 days had passed since she discovered her husband and best friend tangled in her Egyptian cotton sheets. 3 days of fury, pain, and now crystallizing determination. The evidence is overwhelming, Kingston continued, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. Emails, credit card statements, hotel receipts. They weren't even trying to be discreet anymore. But it's the business angle that really gives us leverage. He pulled out a particular file, its pages marked with yellow highlights. Calix used company resources to facilitate the affair. Business trips that coincided with Brielle's academic conferences, investment funds directed toward quantum computing projects she was researching, corporate apartments used for their rendezvous. The board will have serious concerns about his judgment. The board meeting is tomorrow, Bethany said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. All the major shareholders will be there. Kingston's smile was predatory. Perfect timing, but before we discuss strategy, there's something else you should see. He pressed a button on his desk intercom. Send in Mr. Chen. The door opened to admit a slight, serious-looking man carrying a laptop. Ms. Washington, I'm David Chen, head of our forensic accounting team. We've been analyzing the financial records of Prince Global's art investment division. David set up his laptop, turning the screen so Bethany could see the complex spreadsheets displayed. Your expertise and connections were instrumental in building this division. Without you, they would never have accessed certain collections or gained the trust of key collectors. He clicked through several slides, each showing the division's growth over the past 3 years. Your influence is clear in every major acquisition, every successful investment. The division's value has tripled under your guidance. And now they think they can just push me aside. Bethany's laugh was bitter. After I've built their reputation in the art world. They're going to try, Kingston said, leaning forward. Calix has hired Richard Hawthorne. Bethany's fingers tightened on the arms of her chair. Hawthorne was known as the corporate executioner, a lawyer who specialized in removing inconvenient spouses from company positions during high-profile divorces. He'll try to paint you as a dilettante, Kingston continued, someone who married into wealth and played at being an art expert. He'll downplay your contributions, question your expertise, suggest that any success was due to the Prince name and resources. He clearly doesn't know me very well. Bethany stood, moving to the window. Sydney spread below her, the opera house gleaming like a broken promise in the morning light. I was a respected curator before I met Calix. I built my reputation on my own merits. Exactly, Kingston joined her at the window. And that's what makes their strategy so risky. The art world knows your value. If they try to diminish you professionally, it will backfire spectacularly. He returned to his desk, pulling out another file. Which brings us to our counter-strategy. We're not just filing for divorce, we're going after control of the art investment division. Bethany turned from the window, her eyes sharp. Can we do that? Under normal circumstances, no, but these aren't normal circumstances. Kingston's smile widened. We have evidence that Calix used the division to facilitate his affair with Brielle. Business trips that were really rendezvous, corporate resources used for personal purposes. More importantly, we can prove that the division's success is directly tied to your expertise and connections. David Chen spoke up from his position at the laptop. The numbers support this. When we isolate the investments you influenced from those made without your input, the pattern is clear. Your choices consistently outperformed the market. But it's more than just numbers, Kingston added. It's about relationships. The art world runs on trust and reputation. Once this story breaks, how many collectors will want to work with them? How many deals will fall through when your connections withdraw their support? Bethany returned to her seat, her mind racing. They'll try to keep it quiet. Calix hates scandal. Too late. Kingston handed her a tablet displaying several society websites. The photos were already circulating. Calix and Brielle leaving his lawyer's office together, their body language intimate despite the professional setting. Sydney's social circles were buzzing with speculation. Your silence has been admirable, Kingston said. But they're already controlling the narrative. Witnesses saw you leave the charity gala early. There are rumors about you checking into the Four Seasons. People are starting to talk. Let them talk. Bethany's voice was ice. I have nothing to hide. No, you don't. But we need to be strategic about how this plays out. Kingston pulled out a legal pad. The board meeting tomorrow is our first opportunity to take control of the situation. You'll be there as head of the Art Investment Division, a position you earned through expertise and results. When Hawthorne tries to challenge your role, we'll be ready. He began outlining points on the pad. First, we present the division's performance under your leadership. Then, we introduce evidence of how Calix's personal choices have put that success at risk. Finally, we propose a solution. You take full control of the division, separating it from the drama of the divorce. The shareholders will support this, David added, pulling up more financial data. The Art Investment Division represents a significant portion of their recent growth. They won't want to risk losing the relationships you've built. Bethany studied the numbers, her art curator's eye finding patterns in the data. We'll need to move quickly. Some of these deals are time-sensitive. Exactly why we can't let this drag out in court. Kingston handed her a thick document. This is our initial proposal. Full control of the Art Investment Division, the Harborview House, and a significant portion of their shared assets. In return, we don't pursue certain other avenues of inquiry. What other avenues? Kingston's expression turned serious. There are questions about some of the quantum computing investments, the timing of certain deals, the flow of information between Calix and Brielle. It could look like insider trading if someone wanted to dig deeper. Bethany absorbed this, remembering all the late-night discussions she'd overheard between her husband and former best friend. How many of those conversations had crossed ethical lines? How many business decisions had been influenced by their affair? We're not just fighting for your rights as a wronged spouse, Kingston continued. We're protecting the company's reputation and the shareholders' interests. Hawthorne is good, but even he can't argue against cold, hard numbers. A knock at the door interrupted them. Kingston's assistant entered with a package. This just arrived from Mr. Marcus at the gallery. Bethany opened it to find Brielle's journal, the one Marcus had discovered while collecting her personal items. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages, reading entries that documented the betrayal in painful detail. The way he looks at me during our discussions. I know it's wrong, but I can't help feeling this connection. Met secretly today. The guilt is overwhelming, but when we're together, everything else fades away. Beth suspects something. I see it in her eyes. How did we let things go this far? Kingston read over her shoulder, his expression grim. This is powerful evidence of premeditation. They can't claim it was a momentary lapse of judgment. Bethany closed the journal, unable to read more. They betrayed everything. My marriage, my friendship, my trust in both of them. And for what? Some romantic fantasy about forbidden love? People do strange things for love, Kingston said quietly. But that doesn't excuse their choices. No, it doesn't. Bethany stood, gathering her composure like a cloak. What do you need me to do for tomorrow? Kingston outlined the plan. Bethany would attend the board meeting as usual, presenting the art division's quarterly report. When Hawthorne made his move to challenge her position, they would counter with their evidence and proposal. Wear something powerful, he advised. You'll be facing not just the board, but Sydney's entire business community. This is your moment to show them who you really are. Bethany nodded, already planning her armor for the battle ahead. She had dressed for success her entire career, using fashion to command respect in rooms full of people who underestimated her. Tomorrow would be no different. As she prepared to leave, Kingston caught her arm. One more thing. they'll try to provoke an emotional response. Hawthorne will want you to look unstable, irrational. Don't give them that satisfaction. Trust me, Bethany said, her voice steady. I'm done letting emotions cloud my judgment. She left Kingston's office with a clear plan and a stronger resolve. The sun was setting over Sydney Harbour, turning the water to liquid fire. Somewhere in the city, Calix and Brielle were probably planning their own strategy, thinking they held the upper hand. Let them think that, Bethany mused as her car wound through Sydney's streets. Let them believe their love story would conquer all, that their betrayal would go unpunished. Tomorrow would show them exactly what they were up against. In her hotel suite, she laid out her clothes for the board meeting. A custom Alexander McQueen suit in deep burgundy, the color of spilled wine, of power, of revenge. Her mother had always told her that success was the best revenge, but Bethany had something else in mind. She would take everything they had built together, the art division, the house, the reputation they shared. But more than that, she would show them that their betrayal had transformed her into someone stronger, someone who no longer believed in the power of trust or love. The harbour winds whispered against her window, carrying the salt tang of the sea and the promise of storms to come. Tomorrow would bring the first battle in what promised to be a war for everything she had earned. Let them come with their lawyers and their excuses. Bethany Washington was ready. Chapter 9. The Court Battle. The media circus exploded when the case hit the courts. Sydney's Supreme Court building stood imposing against the morning sky. Its sandstone columns witnessed to countless dramas, but few as sensational as this. Photographers lined the steps, their cameras tracking every arrival like predators stalking prey. Bethany emerged from Kingston's black Mercedes with practiced grace, her Stella McCartney suit in deep navy, a statement of both power and restraint. The press surged forward, shouting questions. Ms. Washington, any comment on the allegations? Did you suspect the affair? What about the company's quantum computing investments? She moved through them like smoke, neither acknowledging nor avoiding, her dignity a shield against their hunger for scandal. Kingston walked beside her, his presence both protective and strategic. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with Sydney's elite. Prince Global's stock had taken a significant hit when the story broke, and shareholders packed the gallery, eager to protect their interests. Society figures filled the remaining seats, drawn by the irresistible combination of wealth, betrayal, and revenge. Calix was already seated at the defendant's table, his normally confident posture slightly diminished in the austere setting. Richard Hawthorne, the corporate executioner, leaned close, whispering last-minute strategies. Behind them, Brielle sat in the front row, her honey blonde hair pulled back severely, her blue eyes red-rimmed but determined. All rise! Judge Elena Rosewood swept in, her reputation for handling high-profile cases with iron control preceding her. She surveyed the packed courtroom with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Be seated. Kingston Blackwood, you may begin your opening statement. Kingston rose smoothly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room. Your Honor, this case is about more than marital infidelity. It's about the calculated betrayal of trust by two people who owed Ms. Washington the highest duty of loyalty. He moved to the center of the courtroom, commanding attention. We will prove that Mr. Prince not only betrayed his marriage vows, but used company resources to facilitate an affair with Ms. Silver, a woman who was living in their home, benefiting from Ms. Washington's generosity while pursuing a relationship with her husband. Photographs appeared on the courtroom screens, Calix and Brielle at various events, their body language increasingly intimate as the timestamps progressed. Credit card statements showed dinners, hotel rooms, gifts purchased with corporate funds. Furthermore, Kingston continued, we will demonstrate that Ms. Washington's expertise and connections were instrumental in building Prince Global's art investment division. The company's success in this sector is directly attributable to her knowledge, reputation, and relationships within the art world. He turned to face the gallery, where several prominent art collectors sat watching. When this betrayal becomes public knowledge, how many of these valuable relationships will survive? How many collectors will trust a company that treated its art director and their trusted advisor with such disregard? Hawthorne was on his feet immediately. Objection! Counsel is attempting to intimidate shareholders. Stating facts is not intimidation, Kingston countered smoothly. The art world operates on trust and reputation. These are relevant business considerations. Judge Rosewood considered for a moment. Overruled. Continue, Mr. Blackwood. The morning proceeded with a parade of witnesses. Gallery directors testified to Bethany's expertise and influence. Financial experts detailed the art division's growth under her leadership. Hotel staff described Calix and Brielle's numerous business meetings in intimate restaurants and luxury suites. Then came the most damaging testimony, Prince Global's own board members expressing concern about Calix's judgment. Did Mr. Prince disclose his relationship with Ms. Silver when proposing investments in quantum computing projects related to her research? Kingston asked the chief financial officer. No, the CFO replied, clearly uncomfortable. Those connections only came to light after recent events. And would knowledge of this relationship have affected the board's decision-making process? Objection! Hawthorne nearly shouted. Calls for speculation. Sustained. Judge Rosewood's gavel cracked. Rephrase, Mr. Blackwood. Kingston nodded. What are the company's policies regarding personal relationships that might influence investment decisions? All such relationships must be disclosed, the CFO answered. It's a matter of corporate governance and shareholder protection. Throughout the testimony, Bethany sat perfectly still, her face a mask of composure. Only those who knew her well might notice the slight tremor in her hands as each new betrayal was laid bare. After lunch, Hawthorne began his counterattack. Ms. Washington, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, isn't it true that your position at Prince Global was obtained through your marriage to my client? No, Bethany replied clearly. I was a respected curator before meeting Calix. My expertise in contemporary and Aboriginal art was why the company sought my input on investment opportunities. Yet you had no formal business training. I had 15 years of experience in art valuation and market analysis. The division's performance speaks for itself. Hawthorne changed tactics. Let's discuss the night you claim to have discovered the affair. You'd been drinking at a gallery event, hadn't you? Kingston rose. Objection, relevance. Goes to the witness's state of mind and reliability of her account. Overruled, Judge Rosewood said. The witness will answer. I had 1 glass of wine over a 3-hour event, Bethany stated firmly. I was completely clear-headed when I found my husband and best friend in my bed. A murmur ran through the gallery. Several shareholders exchanged glances. And you immediately moved out, correct? Hawthorne pressed. Abandoned your position at the company without notice? I removed myself from an untenable personal situation, Bethany corrected. My professional obligations were handled through appropriate channels. The questioning continued, Hawthorne trying to paint her as unstable, vengeful, unprofessional. But Bethany remained unshakable, her responses measured and precise. Then came the moment that changed everything. Kingston rose, holding Brielle's journal. Your Honor, we'd like to enter this into evidence. Hawthorne objected immediately, but Judge Rosewood allowed it after confirming its authenticity. As Kingston read selected entries aloud, the courtroom fell silent. July 15th, Calix understands me in ways no one else ever has. The guilt is overwhelming, but I can't stop these feelings. August 3rd, another late meeting. The lies come so easily now. Beth trusts us both completely. That's what makes this so terrible. September 10th, discussed quantum computing investments today. Calix says he can direct company funds toward my research. Is this wrong? Everything feels wrong, but I can't walk away. Brielle sat with her head bowed, tears falling freely. Calix stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. And in the gallery, shareholders whispered urgently to each other. Kingston's closing argument was devastating. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. This isn't simply about a marriage destroyed by infidelity. It's about a systematic betrayal of trust, personal, professional, and corporate. Ms. Washington's reputation in the art world, built over decades of dedicated work, was used to enhance Prince Global's prestige and profits. Meanwhile, her husband abused company resources to pursue an affair with her best friend, potentially compromising investment decisions worth millions. He turned to face the gallery. The art investment division exists because of Ms. Washington's expertise and connections. Its continued success depends on maintaining the trust of collectors and dealers who work with her. The only equitable solution is to grant her full control of the division she built, along with fair compensation for the personal and professional damage inflicted by these betrayals. Hawthorne's closing seemed weak in comparison, his arguments about corporate structure and shareholder interests hollow against the weight of evidence. Judge Rosewood's ruling came 2 days later. The courtroom was even more packed than before, speculation running wild about the outcome. Having considered all evidence and arguments, she began, this court finds compelling proof of both personal and professional misconduct. The intermingling of corporate and personal interests shows serious lack of judgment on Mr. Prince's part. She shuffled her papers. Therefore, I am granting Ms. Washington's petition for control of Prince Global's art investment division, which will be spun off as a separate entity under her leadership. Additionally, she is awarded the Harborview property and 40% of the couple's joint assets. The gallery erupted in whispers. Bethany sat motionless, feeling the weight of victory settle around her shoulders. Furthermore, Judge Rosewood continued, given the evidence of potentially improper investment decisions, I am referring certain matters to the corporate regulatory authorities for review. Calix's face went pale. Beside him, Hawthorne scribbled furiously. This court is adjourned. The media frenzy outside was explosive, but Bethany moved through it with quiet dignity. Kingston fielded questions about the ruling while she made her way to the waiting car. Just before reaching it, she heard Brielle's voice. Beth, please. Bethany turned, facing her former friend one last time. You know what the worst part is? I would have supported your dreams, celebrated your success, given you anything you needed. All you had to do was not betray me. She left Brielle standing on the courthouse steps, tears streaming down her face. In the car, Kingston handed her a glass of champagne. Congratulations, you won everything we asked for. Not everything, Bethany said softly, watching Sydney pass by through tinted windows. Some things can't be restored by court orders. But as they drove toward her hotel, she felt something shift inside her. The victory wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about standing up for herself, refusing to let betrayal define her future. The sun was setting over Sydney Harbour, painting the Opera House in shades of gold and promise. Tomorrow, she would begin building something new from the ashes of betrayal. But today, Bethany Washington had shown the world exactly who she was. Unbreakable, unstoppable, and ultimately triumphant. Chapter 10. The Testimony. Brielle Silver sat in the witness box, her usual confidence crumbling under Kingston Blackwood's methodical questioning. The courtroom remained packed, despite being the third day of testimonies. Sydney's elite, unwilling to miss a moment of the unfolding drama. Outside, rain pounded against the building's sandstone walls, nature providing a fitting backdrop to the storm of revelations within. "Miss Silver," Kingston began, his voice deceptively gentle, "please tell the court about your arrival in Sydney. How did you come to live in the Washington Prince household?" Brielle's fingers twisted in her lap, her designer suit doing little to hide her discomfort. I was accepted into the University of Sydney's PhD program in quantum physics. Bethany offered to let me stay in their guest wing while I got settled. "And how long had you known Ms. Washington at this point?" "Since high school. We were best friends for 20 years. Her voice cracked on the last word. Kingston nodded, letting the weight of that friendship hang in the air. 20 years. During which Ms. Washington supported your dreams, celebrated your successes, stood by you through difficulties. Yes. The word was barely a whisper. And how did you repay that loyalty? Hawthorne jumped to his feet. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Rosewood ruled. Rephrase, Mr. Blackwood. Kingston approached the witness box, presenting a stack of papers. These are email exchanges between you and Mr. Prince, beginning 2 months after your arrival in Sydney. Would you please read the highlighted portion from September 15th? Brielle's hands shook as she took the document. Calix, tonight was incredible. The way you understand me, the connection we share. I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel. Beth would be devastated if she knew. So you were aware that your actions would hurt Ms. Washington? Yes. Tears began rolling down Brielle's cheeks. Yet you continued the affair. Why? Objection, Hawthorne called again. Relevance? Kingston turned to Judge Rosewood. Your Honor, Ms. Silver's state of mind is directly relevant to establishing the premeditated nature of this betrayal. Overruled. The witness will answer. Brielle dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. I didn't plan for this to happen. Calix and we connected over quantum physics. He understood my research in ways no one else did. One thing led to another. Things don't simply lead to another without conscious choices being made, Kingston pressed. Did you choose to pursue a relationship with your best friend's husband while living in their home? It wasn't like that. No, then please explain these hotel receipts. Kingston projected a series of documents onto the courtroom screens. Dozens of meetings in luxury hotels, all charged to Prince Global corporate accounts. Were these also unplanned? Brielle's composure cracked entirely. We fell in love. I know it was wrong, but you can't help who you love. A soft sound escaped from where Bethany sat at the plaintiff's table, something between a laugh and a sob. Kingston let the moment stretch, then continued. Let's discuss your research funding. When did Mr. Prince first suggest using corporate resources to support your quantum computing projects? I don't remember exactly. Allow me to refresh your memory. Kingston produced another email. November 3rd. Darling, I found a way to direct investment funds toward your research. The board won't question it if we present it through the proper channels. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Was this before or after you began sleeping with Mr. Prince? Objection! Hawthorne was on his feet again. Counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Move on, Mr. Blackwood. Kingston nodded, but the damage was done. He moved to his next line of questioning. Ms. Silver, did you ever consider how your actions might affect Ms. Washington's professional reputation? The relationships she had built in the art world. Beth is brilliant. Her reputation stands on its own. Yet you were willing to risk damaging that reputation by engaging in an affair that, when discovered, would inevitably become public knowledge in Sydney's close-knit social circles. Brielle's voice was small. I didn't think... No, Kingston cut in. You didn't think about anyone but yourself. One final question. Did you plan this from the beginning? Was your PhD application to Sydney just a convenient excuse? No. Brielle's cry echoed through the courtroom. I came here to study, to pursue my dreams. Beth was my best friend. I loved her like a sister. Loved her so much you slept with her husband in her own bed. Objection. Withdrawn. Kingston returned to his seat, leaving Brielle sobbing in the witness box. After a brief recess, it was Hawthorne's turn to question Brielle. His approach was gentler, trying to paint a picture of unavoidable attraction and genuine emotions. Miss Silver, please describe your intellectual connection with Mr. Prince. Brielle had composed herself somewhat. Calix has a deep understanding of quantum physics from his university days. He could follow my research, challenge my theories. Our discussions were stimulating, and these discussions naturally led to deeper feelings. Yes, we tried to fight it at first, but the connection was undeniable. Would you say your relationship with Mr. Prince is based on genuine intellectual and emotional compatibility? Kingston stood. Objection. The nature of their relationship isn't relevant to the matters before this court. Your Honor, Hawthorne argued, the defense contends that this is more than a simple affair. The genuine nature of their connection speaks to Mr. Prince's state of mind regarding business decisions. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Hawthorne. Brielle's testimony continued, alternating between attempts to justify their actions and moments of obvious guilt. Throughout it all, Bethany sat perfectly still, her face a mask of composure as she listened to her former best friend describe falling in love with her husband. The day's final witness was unexpected. Marcus, Bethany's gallery assistant, called by Kingston to testify about the professional impact of the affair. Mr. Chen, Kingston began, you've worked closely with Ms. Washington for several years. What changes did you notice after Ms. Silver's arrival? Marcus adjusted his glasses. At first, everything seemed perfect. Ms. Washington was thrilled to have her friend close. But gradually, things started shifting. Mr. Prince began spending more time at the gallery when Ms. Silver would visit. There were long lunches, private meetings to discuss investment opportunities. Did these meetings seem professional in nature? Not entirely. Their body language was intimate. I started documenting instances because I was concerned about the impact on the gallery's reputation. Kingston projected a series of photographs Marcus had taken, Calix and Brielle in various compromising moments, all within the professional setting of the gallery. And how did this affect Ms. Washington's work relationships? She began receiving fewer invitations to exclusive viewings. Some collectors became hesitant to deal with us directly. In our world, reputation and trust are everything. The rumors were already affecting business before the affair became public. The testimony continued until late afternoon, each revelation adding another layer to the picture of betrayal. When Judge Rosewood finally called an end to the day's proceedings, the gallery buzzed with speculation about the next day's witnesses. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered in the rain, hoping for comments. Bethany emerged under Kingston's umbrella, her head held high despite the cameras and questions shouted in her direction. Brielle tried to approach one last time, her voice carrying over the noise of the media scrum. Beth, please, there's so much I need to say. Bethany paused, turning to face her former friend. The cameras went wild, capturing the moment these two women locked eyes. One broken by her own actions, the other strengthened by survival. You've said enough, Bethany replied, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. 20 years of friendship, and you couldn't find the words to tell me you were unhappy, that you wanted something more. Instead, you chose deception. Every smile, every hug, every late-night conversation, all while you were betraying me in the most intimate way possible. She stepped closer, her voice dropping so only Brielle could hear. I would have understood if you'd fallen in love with him and been honest about it. I would have been hurt, yes, but I would have respected your feelings. Instead, you chose to lie, to sneak around, to make me doubt my own instincts. That's what I can never forgive. Brielle reached out, but Bethany was already turning away, disappearing into her waiting car. As they pulled away from the curb, Kingston squeezed her hand. You did well today. Tomorrow's testimony will be harder. Calix takes the stand. Bethany nodded, watching the rain trace patterns on the car window. I'm ready. After hearing Brielle destroy 20 years of friendship in a single afternoon, nothing Calix says can hurt me more. But as they drove through Sydney's rain-slicked streets, her hand crept up to touch the empty space where her wedding ring had once rested. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more pain, more betrayal laid bare for public consumption. Yet somehow, sitting in the back of that car with the rain drumming on the roof, Bethany felt stronger than she had in months. The truth, no matter how painful, was finally coming to light. And in that light, she would rise from the ashes of betrayal, stronger and more determined than ever. Chapter 11. Justice Served. The day of the ruling dawned bright and clear over Sydney, the harbour waters reflecting a sky so perfectly blue it seemed almost artificial. Inside the Supreme Court's imposing chambers, tension crackled like static electricity as Judge Elena Rosewood prepared to deliver her verdict. Bethany sat at the plaintiff's table, the weight of the past months visible only in the slight shadows beneath her eyes. Her Alexander McQueen suit in deep garnet was a statement of power and resilience, the color reminiscent of both wine and blood, fitting for this day of reckoning. The gallery was packed beyond capacity. Board members from Prince Global Investments sat in a tight cluster, their faces tense with anticipation. Art world luminaries filled several rows, their presence a silent testament to their support of Bethany. Even the usually jaded court reporters leaned forward in their seats, sensing the historical significance of the moment. Calix and Brielle sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, a strategic decision by their lawyers to present them as independent actors rather than conspirators. He wore his customary bespoke suit like armor, though it couldn't hide the strain of the proceedings. She looked smaller somehow, her academic confidence stripped away by weeks of damaging testimony. "All rise!" the bailiff called out, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. Judge Rosewood entered, her robes flowing behind her as she took her place at the bench. Her reputation for thorough, well-reasoned judgments had made her both respected and feared in Sydney's legal circles. "Be seated," she commanded, adjusting her glasses as she surveyed the crowded courtroom. "Having carefully considered all evidence presented in this case, I am prepared to render my decision." She lifted the first page of her ruling, her voice clear and deliberate. "The matter before this court is not merely a divorce proceeding, but a complex web of personal and professional betrayals that demand careful consideration of both emotional and financial damages." The judge paused, her gaze sweeping the room. The evidence has proven beyond doubt that Mr. Prince and Ms. Silver engaged in a premeditated affair while Ms. Silver was a guest in the Washington Prince household. This breach of trust was compounded by their use of corporate resources to facilitate their relationship, raising serious questions about Mr. Prince's judgment as CEO. Calix shifted in his seat, his lawyer scribbling frantically. Brielle's hands twisted in her lap, tears already starting to fall. "Furthermore," Judge Rosewood continued, "the court finds compelling evidence that Ms. Washington's expertise and connections were instrumental in building Prince Global's art investment division. Her professional reputation, cultivated over years of dedicated work, has been needlessly jeopardized by the defendant's actions. She lifted another page. Therefore, this court rules as follows. First, regarding the division of marital assets, Ms. Washington is awarded 50% of all joint holdings, including properties in Sydney, Melbourne, and overseas. A murmur ran through the gallery. This was expected, but the confirmation still caused ripples of reaction. Second, and more significantly, the court orders that Prince Global's art investment division be separated from the parent company and placed under Ms. Washington's sole control. This division, which she was instrumental in building, will be established as an independent entity with all current clients, contracts, and resources intact. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. This was unprecedented. A corporate division awarded as part of a divorce settlement. Calix's face had gone pale, while his lawyer was already preparing motion papers. Furthermore, Judge Rosewood's voice cut through the whispers. Given the evidence of improper use of corporate resources and potential conflicts of interest in investment decisions, this court is referring certain matters to regulatory authorities for review. Now it was Brielle who went pale, her academic career suddenly hanging by a thread. Any investigation into the quantum computing investments could derail her PhD and destroy her professional credibility. Regarding the Harborview Mansion, the judge continued, the property is awarded to Ms. Washington, along with all contents and artwork. Mr. Prince will have 30 days to remove his personal belongings. She shuffled her papers, but wasn't finished. The court also grants Ms. Washington's request for a restraining order against both Mr. Prince and Ms. Silver, prohibiting them from approaching her residence or place of business. The judge removed her glasses, her expression stern as she delivered the final part of her ruling. Let the record show that this court finds the defendant's actions particularly egregious, given the breach of both personal and professional trust. Ms. Silver's presence in the Washington Prince home was predicated on a 20-year friendship and Ms. Washington's generosity. Mr. Prince's use of corporate resources to facilitate the affair shows a disturbing lack of judgment that shareholders may wish to consider. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. This ruling is effective immediately. Court is adjourned. The gallery erupted in controlled chaos. Shareholders huddled in urgent discussion while reporters rushed for the exits, phones already pressed to their ears. Kingston turned to Bethany, squeezing her hand in quiet victory. Your Honor, Hawthorne was on his feet. We move for a stay pending appeal. Denied, Judge Rosewood said firmly. The evidence in this case is clear. Any appeal would merely delay the inevitable. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy was explosive. Cameras flashed like strobe lights as Bethany emerged, Kingston by her side. She moved through the crowd with quiet dignity, ignoring the shouted questions. Ms. Washington, how does it feel to take control of the art division? Will you retain the Prince name for the company? Any comment on the regulatory investigation? Near the courthouse steps, Brielle made one last attempt to approach. Beth, please. I never meant for any of this. Bethany stopped, turning to face her former friend. The cameras went wild, capturing what would become an iconic image. Two women who had once been closer than sisters, now separated by an ocean of betrayal. You never meant for what exactly? Bethany's voice was soft, but carried clearly. You never meant to fall in love with my husband, never meant to lie to my face day after day, never meant to destroy 20 years of friendship. Brielle's tears fell freely now. I'm so sorry. Save your apologies. Bethany cut her off. They're worth as much as your loyalty was. She turned away, leaving Brielle sobbing on the courthouse steps as Prince Global's stock price ticker ran across the news screens behind her, showing a sharp decline. Calix waited by her car, one last attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. "Bethany, what happened between us is over," she finished for him. "Just like your control of the art division, just like any claim you had to my trust. I still love you," he said softly. Bethany laughed, the sound sharp as broken glass. "No, Calix, you loved the idea of me, the brilliant curator who brought culture to your corporate world. But real love requires respect, and you never truly respected me. If you had, you wouldn't have betrayed me with my best friend in my own bed." She slid into the waiting car, Kingston closing the door behind her. Through the tinted windows, she watched Calix standing alone on the sidewalk, his empire crumbling around him. The drive back to the Four Seasons was quiet, Sydney's streets flowing past in a blur of sunshine and shadow. Kingston reviewed the practical next steps, transferring control of the art division, changing locks at the Harborview mansion, implementing the restraining orders. "The regulatory investigation will keep them both distracted," he noted. "Neither can leave the country while it's ongoing." Bethany nodded, watching her city pass by. She had won more than she'd expected, but victory tasted different than she'd imagined. Not sweet, not bitter, but something more complex, like the finest wines she and Calix used to share before everything shattered. In her hotel suite, she found messages waiting from around the world, gallery directors pledging their continued support, collectors reaffirming their commitment to working with her, artists offering congratulations and solidarity. The art world had chosen its side. As evening settled over Sydney, Bethany stood at her window, watching lights flicker on across the harbour. The Opera House glowed against the darkening sky, its white sails as pristine as ever. She thought of the night she met Calix there, how he had looked at her contemporary art installation and seen beyond the surface to the deeper patterns beneath. If only he had looked at their marriage with the same insight. If only Brielle had valued their friendship more than a forbidden romance. But regret was a luxury she could no longer afford. The judge's ruling had given her everything she'd asked for: control, independence, justice. The rest would come with time, healing, growth, perhaps even forgiveness, though that seemed impossible now. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus at the gallery. "The collectors are all staying with us." Every single one. Bethany smiled, remembering Kingston's words from their first meeting. "They've given us everything we need." Indeed they had. In trying to take everything from her, Calix and Brielle had inadvertently given her the tools for her own liberation. Their betrayal had forced her to fight, not just for her assets, but for her very identity. The harbour winds whispered against her window, carrying salt and possibility on their breath. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, restructuring the art division, rebuilding her personal life, reinventing herself beyond the labels of wife and friend. But tonight, Bethany Washington stood alone in her victory, knowing that sometimes justice comes not in the form we expect, but in the shape we need to become whole again. The end. A lesson in trust. In the end, Bethany Washington discovered that betrayal, while devastating, can also be transformative. The two people she trusted most had shattered her world, but in doing so, they had forced her to build something stronger from the broken pieces. The letters arrived a week after the court ruling, Calix's elegant stationery and Brielle's familiar handwriting, both begging forgiveness, both seeking absolution for their betrayal. They remained unopened on her desk, silent testimonies to a past she had transcended. For in the crucible of betrayal, Bethany had learned life's most valuable lesson. True strength comes not from revenge or retribution, but from rising above pain with grace and dignity. She had fought not for vengeance, but for justice, not to destroy, but to rebuild. Trust, once broken, is like shattered glass. You can try to piece it back together, but the cracks will always show. Better to use those sharp edges to cut away what no longer serves you and build something new, something stronger, something entirely your own. In the end, Bethany Washington lost a husband and a best friend, but she found something far more precious, an unshakable faith in her own resilience, and the knowledge that some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes, for they are not just reminders of betrayal, but monuments to rebirth. The end. Subscribe if you loved.